Hey, Ms. Bagwell here. I'm going to read Who was Cesar Chavez? Chapter 5, page 60, Refusing to be Ignored. Starting on September 20th, 1965, NFWA union members did not go to work. Instead, they joined the AWOC members and picketed on the roads along the many acres of grape fields called vineyards. They carried signs that read Huelga, which means strike in Spanish. They chanted Huelga, 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 and shouted to workers still in the fields to join them. Days and weeks went by. The growers became very upset that they had lost so many workers. They were surprised that a poor Mexican American like Cesar was brave and smart enough to make such an impact. They played loud music to drown out the shouts of the strikers. They turned their dogs on them, sprayed them with pesticides, and even threatened them with guns. The police did nothing to help. Instead, they harassed the strikers too. In October, the county sheriff even made it illegal to use the word huelga. He said the noise disturbed the workers still in the fields. A group of strikers, including Helen, still shouted huelga. They were arrested and spent a few days in jail. Through it all, Cesar insisted that the strikers remain peaceful and not fight back. Violence can only hurt us and our cause, he said. As Cesar hoped, the strike drew attention from people outside of the Delano area. Reporters came from other U.S. cities to write stories about what was happening there. Cesar spoke at colleges to get volunteers to support their strike. Soon, students, church leaders, lawyers, government officials, and national labor organizations offered to help them. Cesar was pleased. It's amazing they all work together. That's the miracle of it all, he said. Volunteers gave time, money, and donations of food and clothing. Some even marched with them on picket lines. It was very difficult for the workers to stay on strike. They weren't earning any money and couldn't pay their bills. Some left the area to find jobs elsewhere. Some picked different crops for other growers. Some even went back to work for the grape growers. But the migrants who did stay with the strike, believed their goal was worth fighting for. To make sure their grapes didn't rot on the vines, the growers brought in pickers from outside the San Joaquin Valley. They came from Mexico and from poor neighborhoods in the city of Los Angeles. Then winter arrived, and the growers didn't even need workers. The strike seemed to be losing its energy. So Cesar decided to affect the growers in a different way. He sent out volunteers to block the grape deliveries on loading docks in Los Angeles and San Francisco. He didn't want any of the grapes that had been picked to arrive at the grocery stores and markets. He also urged people to boycott, that means to refuse to buy, grapes from companies that were unfair to the workers. News of the situation in Delano had reached the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. Some members of Congress were working toward changing the National Labor Relations Act to finally protect farm workers. The National Labor Relations Act had been passed in 1935 to give employees in many industries the right to form labor unions that would help protect their rights to fair wages and safe workspaces. But it specifically did not include farm workers. On March 14, 1966, Senator Robert F. Kennedy and other members of Congress came to Delano to discuss the issue. The committee questioned the sheriff, who had arrested strikers who hadn't broken any laws. Senator Kennedy scolded him and told him to take some time during his lunch break to read the Constitution of the United States. The strike had been going on for about 6 months. Workers wouldn't be needed in the vineyards for months, so Caesar wanted to find a way to keep everyone's attention. He wanted to remind the entire country that the strike was still going on in Delano. He decided to lead a march to Sacramento, the capital of California. Caesar believed that people marching together would draw more attention to the strike. It would unite farm workers, and it would help grow the union by bringing in even more members as they passed through barrios along the route from Delano to Sacramento. He hoped that when he arrived at the capital, Governor Pat Brown would be willing to talk to him about the importance of making grape growers recognize their workers' unions. About 70 people, including members of the NFWA and the AWOC, started out on March 17, 1966, but they faced trouble before they even left Delano. The chief of police and about 30 officers locked arms and blocked the street. Caesar said to them, "We'll stay here if it takes a year." The police finally gave in and let the marchers pass. The 300-mile walk from Delano to Sacramento would take 25 days. Early on, Caesar's legs started to swell. His back was in pain. He had a fever, but he walked on. As the marchers continued on their journey to the capital, workers left the fields to join them. People in towns greeted them with cheers, music, food to eat, and places to sleep. Reporters followed along, and their story appeared in newspapers across the country. When they were about a week away from Sacramento, one of Caesar's volunteers brought him some news. Schenley Industries, one of the major grape growers, wanted to meet with him. The strike and boycott were hurting Schenley's business. The company was willing to sign a contract to recognize the unions. The growers were willing to negotiate better wages and conditions for the workers. The marchers reached Sacramento on Easter Sunday, April 10th. A crowd of more than 8,000 supporters gathered in the park across from the Capitol building. The governor was away on vacation. When he offered to meet with Caesar the very next day, Caesar refused. He wanted to show the governor that he was sick of his excuses. Caesar, Dolores, and others spoke to the crowd about their hopes for the future of the movement. In August 1966, the NFWA became even stronger when Larry Idlong and Caesar combined their two unions into one and called it the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, UFWOC. Later that year, to show support for the union successes, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. sent Caesar a telegram that read, "Our separate struggles are really one, a struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity." By the summer of 1967, the grape strike was finishing its second year. The union had signed contracts with some of the grape growers in Delano, but there were still hundreds of thousands of farm workers who were not protected. As always, Caesar was determined to do more. Now on the page before, we've got a little bit on Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Baptist minister and leader of the African American Civil Rights Movement. He led many peaceful marches and protests to highlight the unfair treatment of black people in the South. In 1963, he helped organize the March on Washington, where he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. In 1964, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. He was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee. And that is Chapter 5. Thank you for reading along with me today. I hope you enjoyed. Hope it makes it a little bit easier to answer your questions for Chapter 5. And stay tuned for tomorrow for Chapter 6. Hope you're staying well and take care.